Greetings and welcome to our series of weekly devotionals where we take a look at one of the lectionary readings for the upcoming week and offer some thoughts for reflection. And this week we're going to take a look at Psalm 90, verses 12 through 17. I had a relative years ago who would tell anybody that would listen that his life's goal was to live forever. And when you would ask him, well, how do you think that's going to work out? He would say, well, so far so good. He also would tell anybody that would listen that he loved to be bored because, according to him, if you were busy and had things to do, time flew by. But if you were bored and had nothing to do, well, time just dragged on and lasted longer. And so his logic was that if he was bored, his life would last longer. I mention this because this psalm reflects on the length of our days. And in verse 13, the psalmist writes, "Turn, O Lord, how long? Have compassion on your servant." He expresses despair. And earlier in the psalm, we learn why. You turn us back to dust and say, "Turn back, you mortals." So in this psalm is expressed human finitude, that our days are limited, and that when getting older as I am, I realize how quickly time indeed does pass by. And this psalm is the only psalm in the entire Psalter that is attributed to Moses. We're not sure if Moses actually wrote this psalm, but tradition attributes this psalm to Moses. And Moses, of course, famously learned the limits of his days. He had helped to free the Israelites from slavery in Egypt in the story of the Exodus, and had led the Israelites around the Sinai desert for 40 years. They finally reached the promised land, but then Moses learned that his days would end before he would be able to enter the promised land. And that had to be a little disheartening and discouraging, maybe even cause for despair. But I think that Moses, as we hear in the scriptures, could rest easy and be at peace, because he knew that although he would not enter the promised land, his people would, and that indeed they were in God's hands. And so I think that gave meaning and a sense of blessing to his days and to the work that he had done leading up to that point. You know, when I was growing up as a kid, I grew up in the Catholic Church, and looking back, I remember that Ash Wednesday was always a huge deal in the church. The church was mobbed with people in the Catholic Church of my upbringing. Not so much anymore, but when I was growing up, if you can believe it, more people came to church on Ash Wednesday than on Easter Sunday, which seems hard to believe. And I always wondered why, because Ash Wednesday seemed a very somber event. It was the day leading into the season of Lent, a very serious and somber and penitential season of the church year. And Ash Wednesday was a day in the church calendar where we focused on our mortality. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. The recognition that indeed our days are numbered. But I think it was so popular and maybe meaningful for people because it reminded us that as mortals, everything isn't up to us. That as persons of faith, our days rest in God's hands. And even though we don't live forever on this side of the veil, we know that we can have faith in God and do what good we can, knowing that God can use it and bless the good that we do, and that even though our days are limited and finite, that they are blessed by God, and that indeed, as mortal beings, we place our faith and rest our days in God. Amen. you.